parade through Mark Rogers TV tonight, and we stop with Claire Crawford talking some Ohio State football. Claire, how you doing tonight?
Happy Halloween, sir. How are you?
Happy Halloween. I jumped online early this morning because I got an idea from somebody, and I just talked about my favorite candy, my favorite Halloween candy, and some of the stuff that I didn't care for when I was a little kid, and you would go to the house and you would be disappointed because they would throw you an apple or some popcorn or something. It was all chocolate for me. And then to a lesser degree, the sweet tarts and the other stuff was okay when I got a little desperate near the end of the week, like a week from now when you're picking through the stale candy. But the chocolate up front was all right with me. But I had meant to stop by the store on my way home and maybe dress up a little bit for tonight. But I am so scatterbrained, Claire. I can't keep a thought in my mind for about 12 seconds. And, I was off to talking to people, going through all this stuff and preparing for the show. And boom, here I am. And then I sat down and thought, yeah, it's Halloween. And I forgot to do what I was going to do. So do you have any big plans tonight, or did you already take care of that?
I already took care of it. I'm being currently ignored by a teenager who won't send me pictures of her costume. So I know you know that life. And then I went to a Halloween party this past weekend where I had maybe the most clever costume I've ever had of all time. I'm not sure if you were able to see it. We had, my other half and I had Kiss makeup on, and then, we had striped shirts and little ties and berets. So we were French Kiss.
Oh,
it was clever.
Who gets the credit for that?
Right here.
Okay, I figured.
Yeah.
All right,
it was
Claire.
Great. And the Buckeyes have the chance to redeem themselves with me and many others on my birthday on Saturday as well. So I'm really truly putting all my happiness eggs into the Buckeye basket.
Well, absolutely. Happy birthday beforehand.
Thank you.
So yeah, I know the game that everybody wants to forget that we're scarlet and gray was quite a while ago because they had a bye week last week. So I'm going to ask you this question, Claire: is this game going to, on Halloween, this would be apropos, haunt the Buckeyes like that other game last year that everyone remembered the score to come college football playoff selection time against Iowa?
So this is how it could haunt the Buckeyes. If the Buckeyes do not prove that they have some sort of semblance of leadership on that team, offensively and defensively. That is the only way to recover from this. And with the incredible scandal and the back and forth with Zach Smith happening, before the season and leading up into Ryan Day taking over for Urban Meyer as head coach for 3 games, I truly believe that this team has the ability to overcome these type of obstacles. The way that we will find out if this team has any sort of semblance of leadership is for them to somehow surmount these obstacles that they've been put forth and not just recover from what the coaches are doing for them, the place that the coaches have put them in, but taking responsibility for their own actions, taking responsibility for what they can control, taking care of their business off the field and moving forward. That is the only way. Shutting out everything that isn't Ohio State football and their academics right now, because it will poison them.
Claire, regardless of the results of this season, it's going to turn out, because it already has been, even if it's the rest of it's smooth sailing and nothing else jumps out at this team, either self-created or from the outside, it is about the strangest season ever in Columbus, from the Zach Smith scandal to Urban Meyer's latest health issues that have been released, to obviously another disparaging loss, and amidst all the accolades given to Dwayne Haskins, and rightfully so, and him possibly setting records. Well, he already has school records for the season. He's well on his way to breaking all sorts of Big Ten records there could be all sorts of highs and lows, and the biggest games have yet to be played. It's just a topsy-turvy season in most respects for a team that's 7-1.
So a game that I think is, again, as fans, we have the luxury of looking ahead, and a game that I think is going to have more importance than we might think as, again, fans, because we all assume that Ohio State and the coaching staff is not looking forward, but seeing how Texas is playing and watching the Big 12 unfold, that Maryland game with Maryland topping Texas early on in the year, being a trap between Michigan State and Michigan, may be a bigger game than Ohio State might expect. Again, Ohio State has to win out. Ohio State has to have some sort of like really dominant performance for the end of the season here, which I think they're entirely capable of doing despite that big loss to Purdue. I think that it may be more impactful as far as the playoff picture looks like.
We got Claire Crawford on the line talking Ohio State football. The Buckeyes back in action after a bye week, taking on Nebraska in Columbus. The Huskers are finally winning a couple games over Minnesota and Bethune-Cookman, as they made up for the Akron game that was wiped out in week 1. So I don't know how much that counts for, but Scott Frost certainly capable, and I think they will have better days at Nebraska, but scuffling at this point. But they do get the one win in the Big Ten against Minnesota, and did it much more impressively than the Buckeyes did against Minnesota the previous week in winning like 30-14, a game that was pretty close going into the fourth quarter. So we've talked about it prior to the Purdue game. We talked about it in those lackluster performances leading into Purdue. But the thing that strikes me about this team is that if there was one thing that we could point to, because every team has its flaws, and Alabama fans, even you do, but they're just not uncovered right now because you haven't played anyone. Every team has its flaws, and what has turned out to be the flaw of this team and other great teams, or really talented teams, let's separate the two. This is not a great team yet. Maybe they'll prove to be. They're not a great team. They're an extremely talented team. They're one of the 2 or 3 most talented teams in the country, is usually because the passing game has become so prolific across the country. There are tons of undermanned teams that have a guy that can throw it and like a couple guys that can really catch it. And they give teams like Ohio State fits, because these quarterbacks and wide receivers, the level of skill and the level of play has risen remarkably in the last 15 to 20 years, because they are raised on passing camps, and they are so polished by the time they get there that you can have 5-star corners and they're still, having all sorts of issues because those kids can pitch and catch. And that's what keeps some of these lesser teams in games. So that I could excuse, because you see that a lot out of some of the better teams in the nation, that they still have issues against great passing attacks. They kind of lose in coverage and that sort of thing. But running the ball, stopping the run, getting gashed on the ground defensively, plus through the air, there's multiple things to deal with here that it will be interesting. Even if the final score is not interesting against Nebraska, this team should win somewhat handily, just to see if there's been any progress made in any of those departments.
Those are a lot of departments. And I think you're spot on with your analysis, with so many of these teams being not just one-dimensional, but one-sided on that dimension as well. So Ohio State is guilty of it currently right now as well. I think it's another conversation for another day, but we live in a highlight era of sports in general. The Steph Currys of the world with their 3 points. It's difficult to think that doesn't have an impact on a player's mentality. So again, that's another conversation for another day, but I definitely think you opened the box talking about these passing camps and things like that. I know that the leadership at Ohio State from a coaching standpoint is better than that, but what they were working on throughout the week with 2 former 1,000-yard running backs with Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins is, really trying to figure out if it's an offensive line problem, if it's a offensive scheming problem, and how much responsibility did these very talented, as you mentioned, running backs actually have for this lack of actual running game. What we've seen is them really not be able to shed tackles. And it's apparently something that they did work on this week. So I expect to see that improvement. I expect to see a banged up team a little bit more healed. However, on the offensive side of the ball, Austin Mack is now out for the season with foot surgery. So we're going to see a guy like Ben Victor kind of step in literally into his shoes and hopefully make an impact. I don't think those are that's a 1-for-1 conversion with Austin Mack and Ben Victor. Ben Victor had a very spotty spring practice. Urban Meyer mentioned in his press conference this week, talking about the Nebraska game, that Ben Victor was probably one of the most improved players on the team, and it's why he's getting a little more time. But I just think he has a long way to go as far as consistency is concerned. But he definitely has the potential for it. He's a big, tall, lanky wide receiver that Ohio State is now going to have to count on.
Claire, I'm going to hit you with at least one huge question off the live chat. This is an enormous one. It's a loaded question. But before I do, I've got to make mention of two comments that I've received. One was late last night or sometime today that I found rather humorous. And then another one from Coconut Kane just seconds ago. So Coconut Kane said that for Halloween, he's going to dress up as Mark Rogers, and he's going to hold a sign that says the top 25 that actually makes sense. That's something I release every Sunday, is the top 25 that actually makes sense. But I don't know that I want to see anybody dress up as me, because then I'll come to the realization, is that what I really look like? Yeah. And then today, somebody just commented. I've never seen a comment from this person, but they just commented, "How are you not famous?" And I thought that was nice. So anyway, back to Ohio State football, Claire. Somebody's asking here on the live chat. We know that from the time that the Zach Smith scandal came to a head and all that came down, and the discipline was handed to Urban Meyer, then the rumors came out considering the ramifications of that. The health certainly now adds to that. And then the Ryan Day performance during those 3 games. I'm being asked here, ask Claire, will Urban Meyer be back next year?
I don't think so. I think Urban Meyer wants to be back next year. I think Urban Meyer's plan as the Ohio State head coach is to coach as long as humanly possible. And I think that may be this year. From a couple of articles that came out after Urban Meyer was asked in his press conference about his health, and then it just kept popping up as opposed to questions about the actual program. He decided to sit down with a few lucky reporters to give them some more in-depth information about his health, about the cyst in his brain that is not curable and is progressive. And he had surgery on it in 2014 to relieve some of the pressure from fluid and inflammation from this cyst. And 10 months later went on to win a national championship. So I know he knows he can overcome it, I'm sure. Whether he wants to continue overcoming it in the midst of all of the speculation and perhaps a mark on his legacy, whether you regard what happened with Zach Smith, whatever side you land on, there's a mark on his legacy, whether we like it or not. I believe that whatever he is feeling currently is genuine, whatever he is telling us, which is extremely personal. He doesn't have to tell us any of this. I'm sure it is, perking up the ears of Florida fans who went through something similar when Urban Meyer was going through health issues with his heart. And that was a little bit different of a situation, but not because of rumors, not because of any anecdotal evidence, just the way I feel and knowing that I don't think the Zach Smith situation and Ohio State is done in the news cycle, unfortunately. I think that, again, Urban Meyer wants to be back next year. I don't think he will.
When you take into consideration the totality of, again, all these different events that pale in comparison to a Penn State situation, so I'm not likening it to that in that way, or Baylor, or from a football standpoint, the typical we cheated NCAA violations at
Ole
USC and
Miss,
other
Miami.
schools. This is just odd circumstances that all are coming together at the same time that aren't your typical, again, run of the mill, we cheated, NCAA violations, or unfortunately the sex related type stuff at Penn State and Baylor. Just yes. And so whether this ends, and when I say tragically, I mean from a football standpoint, tragically,
Correct.
9-3 tragically, and they just disappoint and don't fulfill the expectations, or this has some kind of glorious upturn to a championship. It's just a one in a zillion season, not just at Ohio State, just anywhere. It's crazy.
And part of me is an optimist, and I want to think like, what an amazing Cinderella story. And it's hard to think about Ohio State as, Cinderella.
Yeah.
For those on the outside, but knowing now what this program has gone through in a very short amount of time. I mean, you and I, this entire summer, we didn't have much to talk about other than some light recruiting and what we might want to see going forward. The news cycle was pretty slow on that, which is always a good thing. But all of this coming out in a very short period of time, and everything kind of linking together, I think, again, Urban would never say, no, I'm not coming back next season, and just randomly announce it in the middle of a news conference for multiple reasons, one of them being for recruiting purposes. So I think we've yet to see the end of Urban Meyer's career, but I don't think it's far in the future.
Claire, it's usually a really fun conversation. Unfortunately, tonight and other times, it's been more of just a meaningful conversation, but it's always at least that, a very valuable conversation with Claire Crawford. So you got to join her on Twitter at Buckeye Claire, and don't you dare include an E.
I'm going to send Michael Myers to your house if you put an E on my name on Twitter.
Oh, that's a Halloween promise.
He is my
not
minion.
a threat. It's a promise. Buckeye Claire, no E, and join her there for her take on Ohio State football. And we will do our best to bring in Claire once a week to talk Ohio State football through the end of the football season.
Next Wednesday, we're going to talk about this amazing birthday present that the Ohio State football team is going to give me on Saturday.
Okay, we will do that. Mark it down. We will see Claire next Wednesday. Thank you so much, Claire. Have a good night.
You too.